Welcome, everybody. My name is Jean Hidalgo. I'm the Youth Program Manager for IHCDA, and Laura Drasic, my colleague, who is the Youth Program Analyst, and I welcome you on behalf of IHCDA and the Balance of State Continuum of Care. This training is a funded project of the Youth Homelessness Systems Improvement Grant in order to uplift and equip youth and young adults who live with housing insecurity or homelessness, and for those who support them. And without further ado, I'm going to pass on this training to the chair of our Youth Advisory Board. Take it away, Paige.
Hi, I'm Paige. I'm the chair of the Indiana Balance of State Youth Advisory Board, and I want to pass it off to our other collaborators to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Paige. Hello, everybody. My name is Slyne or Sly. I am currently working at Point Source Youth as the Director of Program Development and Growth, but I do have a lot of experience and I'm one of the technical assistance provider under youth collaboration for both YHDP and YESI communities under HUD. So just happy to be here, and I'll pass it to Janady.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Janady. Also go by Jojo, which is easier. I am a consultant here with Sly, and I also work with the youth community and substance use.
Thank you. We're so excited to be here today, and we want to just go ahead and start with a brief agenda of what we'll be covering. We will start by defining youth advisory boards, and then next we'll move on to organizational readiness and policies to put in place for youth advisory boards. Third, we'll talk about outreaching and engaging youth authentically. And then last, we'll talk about strengthening partnerships and building sustainability into your youth advisory board. And we can go on to the next slide.
Are the slides changing? Because I don't see them changing on the, okay. Apologies. For some reason they're not changing. Is that better? Okay, apology.
Yes. You're okay. So we wanted to start by establishing some community norms, some specific ones about language. Up here, you can see that we're going to be using terms like youth and young adults instead of kids, just building respect into that conversation, having grace for yourself and others, being intentional, and holding others accountable in the space. Are there any other community agreements that you would like us to abide by? You can drop them in the chat and we can add them. And moving on to introductions, we want to know about you. So there are two different tasks for each of you that are here with us today. The first is to add your name and role in the chat to let us know who you are. And what's one word that you associate with power? And then we also have a poll to see where you're at in the integration of youth within your organization. It looks like we have quite a few organizations who are working through that youth integration. I think that this will be hopefully very helpful to you.
Love it. Thank you for that, because I can't see it. So thanks for highlighting it. Okay. Are we good to move?
Yeah, we'll just let those messages come in and we can move along.
Awesome. Oh my God, I don't know why it's not moving.
It's okay, I can just chat about this one. So first we want to talk about why youth action boards are important. In a lot of organizations, youth action boards can actually save organizations a lot of time and resources by identifying blind spots, surface emerging needs, and design solutions that are practical and culturally relevant. In a lot of cases, youth can spot these blind spots before adults often can. And so that can be very important. Also, authentic partnership with youth advisory boards help organizations and communities gain direction, credibility, and strategies that truly meet the needs of young people. So instead of prescribing solutions, working collaboratively to figure out what is going to be the best use of resource for everybody. I'm going to pass it to Sly to talk about power and its dynamics.
I love it. Thank you so much, Paige. That was great. So as we are learning a little bit about what does it mean to integrate young people into our world and kind of partner with us in collaboration to inform our systems, first we need to take a step back and think about the power dynamics that we play in that collaboration, right? Just by being collaborators, we are representatives of the systems that either have caused harm to young people, but that also have helped and assisted young people in many ways. So whether we like to believe it or not, right, no matter what the role that you're holding, at that level of collaboration, you're already kind of holding some kind of power dynamic that is in balance to what young people may perceive, right? So we want to make sure that we are sending value to youth with lived expertise in a way that empowers them and while acknowledging our positionality in the ones that we are holding. So as adult partners, we really need to address not just that organizational power and like what are some dynamics that we also need to work through before encouraging young people to come and collaborate with us, right? And as they're collaborating with us, but also our personal beliefs, right? Our own personal power and how we want to integrate young people. This is not something that you learn right away. It takes time, it takes practice, right? And sometimes you have to put yourself out there. But one thing that I will say a practice is just to follow with trust, right? And follow with authentic collaboration. So before we get started, I wanted to give a kind of a level setting of what does it mean to define power for all of us. So there's many different ways of that power may show up, right? Here are 4 ways that we see power dynamics play a part in our collaboration with young people. We have power within, which is a lot of that recognition of self-worth, right? And a lot of the young people that we're working with are continue to learn more about themselves, right? They're still growing, they're still developing, they're finding their footing, they're finding their place, but they're also facing a lot of different dynamics and different hardships that we need to be aware of. So it's our power to give that within them and continue to develop that in self-worth. And then you have power 2, which is the power to change space. Are we allowing young people the space to change, right? Are we allowing the people not just to change within themselves, but change the systems, change dynamics and organizational policies, change ways that we deliver service? And then you have power with, which is my favorite, it's all about collaboration base. How are you approaching the work, right? I talked about personal power imbalances and biases as well as overall power. So it's all about really leading within that power with. I am joining this cause with you. And then we have power over, which is one that really stops the other 3, right? It's all fear-based. It's all like, can I do this? I cannot do this. I should not go there, right? It's all very internal, but it can also be placed by someone else or an organization. So things to consider when thinking about how do we define power. Here are, as we are defining power, pathways to power sharing. So we're not here just to name like general language, but we're here to open doors as well and allow you to explore what does power dynamics look like currently within my organization, within my service provision, within my integration of work, but also how do I want to change that? How can I open pathways within my organization or individuals and young people that I work with? So the first one is to make sure that you are developing a youth-led decision-making within the YAB, but as well within your organization, right? And by creating a youth action board, you're kind of opening the door to inform that, right? If you're really following in an authentic way. You want to shift the youth action board from an advisory group to a youth-led decision-making body, right? Allowing young people to feel powerful and that they're making a difference, that they're not just informing system, but they're working alongside you to change those systems that have harmed them or can be better. You want to make sure that you're allowing young people to set priorities, shape agendas, right? Define the issues. Again, Paige mentioned earlier about youth experience and the value that that has. So just making sure that we're always highlighting their perspective and avoiding any kind of tokenization, right? That we are like really taking that information, leading with it, and kind of seeing how can we use it to move forward. That we are allowing youth input in a way that transform the system and make it a requirement, right? That if there's not a young person in the room, right, and we're talking about like this affects young people this way, that we're inviting young people to also affirm that. And then you want to create building capacity for youth and young adults inside the youth action board. So if you're thinking about creating a youth action board or you have started the process, you also want to create a power dynamic that they feel that they can lead, right? So providing trainings for young people on advocacy, public speaking, budgeting, right? To develop those skills on their own. So then that also within themselves is a power structure, right? That's something that they could take to other organizations, that they could take as they move on their walk of life and transform it. And that we're consistently offering opportunities within our organization, right? Many times we're like, oh, let's hire an intern. Why don't we look at young people that have graduated from our youth action board to become those interns or to become that youth consultant or to become that new role that we're looking for? So not to limit yourself, right? Because if we're providing trainings to those young people on development skills early on, they will be a great fit to fit your organization and inform it even better. And then finally, embedding youth power within your organization and your system. So just ensuring that young people are really connected and don't feel like uh, um, uh, a consultant, don't feel like an advisory person. They are really leading the institution and the system change, that they're creating leadership within themselves, and that we are in change highlighting those leaderships, that we're paying them, that we're creating coordination to make sure that they are compensated in a way that matters, right? And again, doesn't make them feel like they're being used. Yeah. Okay, so another thing that I kind of want to highlight is power in compensation. And I mentioned a little bit earlier about like making sure that we are, compensating young people for their time, equal representation. It matters. They have lived expertise. Is a way that we cannot come into the space and inform. So just making sure when we're building compensation into our system that we're really thinking that and leading with a fair and that is a youth center paid, right? That looks very different per organization. That looks very different per our funding, and we'll get a little bit into that later. But just making sure that we're reflecting as to what that means for us, that we're using accessibility, that we are removing any barriers to participation, right? Transportation, that we are developing systems for young people to fill up that timesheet and get paid on time, right? That we're developing systems for that young person to really develop a way to grievances, right? Like what happened, what happens if this happens, right? That they have different forms of payments. Power redistribution. So this really helps in really, again, taking the young person from that volunteer or advisory group to more collaborative. Now with this, that limits the power dynamic, right? I'm getting paid, right? They see my value in my expertise. And then finally, professional and leadership development. So compensation helps frame the youth action board's involvement in a professional work. Again, all those skills that you're teaching young people, they will take on and develop those later on. Okay, we'll pause there and I'll pass it to Paige.
Sai, are you able to move the slides along?
Is it not moving?
No, I'm so sorry.
I am moving them on my end, but Laura, I'm gonna count on you. I don't know why it keeps doing that. I'll stop sharing. And I apologize. I thought it was moving. For some reason, it's not.
If you're using like a presenter mode as you share your screen, you might have to go down on kind of the far bottom left of your presenter mode and change it that way rather than trying to do it if you're using Canva. Yeah.
I'm using Canva, so I should use this, you saying?
Yep. Maybe try it going back and forth once or twice.
That's exactly what I'm using, like the little arrow. So maybe I should use my keyboard.
Yeah,
Okay. I apologize.
that's okay.
Since we have a pretty small group, we're going to do our breakout group as a whole team. So Sly, if you could go ahead and share the participant handout, if that is accessible to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oops.
And what we're going to do as a group, we're going to read a scenario about a youth advisory board or youth action board. And we are going to use Sly's framework to create a couple of ways of sharing power in this situation and a couple of ways of not sharing power in this situation. And then we're going to work together to classify them as power within, power with, power to, or power over. So I'll start by reading.
Are you
Go
able
ahead.
to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm nervous.
No, you're okay. I'll go ahead and read our scenario out loud and you can also see it on your screen. So a YAB is structured so that the leadership team meets prior to each general meeting in order to set the agenda and prioritize items that have arisen since the last meeting. The adult partner shows up to the leadership meeting with great agenda items, highlighting organizational priorities to present to leadership members. After presenting the agenda items, the adult partners ask the members if they agree with the agenda. While many agree, a member suggests prioritizing spending their time in creating a training calendar to better the member's development. The adult partner agrees that this is a need and should be prioritized, but there is no time for that type of discussion. What power dynamic approaches can be used to help power sharing? And how should each agenda item be set and by whom? So if anybody wants to come off mute or type their thoughts in the chat about that scenario, sort of what power dynamics you're noticing, and what would be some ways to sharing power in this situation, I would love to hear your thoughts.
I will also say, I think we will appreciate like if you ever had a situation where you've had to kind of maneuver or plan agenda items with different like youth dynamics. We open to share those as well. But we really would love to hear from anyone that's willing, whether that's via chat, preferably if you are able to come off mute, and just kind of share your input as to what you really think are some power dynamics that are playing by here. Again, this is a safe space. I know that sometimes it gets a little bit, kind of hindering, but this is a safe space. It's a learning space. So yeah, come and share. I see Brittany. I love it. Thank you so much for being so brave.
Hi, everybody. Without kind of knowing broader what the agenda items that have been brought to the table are, I'd say that there's a conversation there for why are things a priority and potentially bouncing it back to the young people to say like what kinds of leadership opportunities are you interested in? And could you do some research while I can also do some research, maybe as the adult, taking on the adult role in this scenario? And then I think, yeah, if there is a need for the agenda items that the adult has brought to the table to take precedence, or to take priority, excuse me, that at least there's a conversation that's happening that's like, well, what do you want to learn, and what opportunities are available to us so that we can maybe address this at the next meeting.
Yes, I love how intentional your engagement is, right? It's not like you're shutting the young person down, right? You're not saying like that is not the approach or we're not doing that, but you're saying like, let's explore why this is important to you and what does it mean? It's giving a lot of like power with, right? Where you are also opening those doors of collaboration and integration with the young person, right? And you're absolutely right. Sometimes there are prioritizations of agenda that we need to like really get to, right? Especially funding sources really demand some requirements, and that's okay. I think as long as we're taking the time to include young people to understand why is that a priority, right? I think that's the important space that we need to also create. So thank you so much for sharing. That was great.
My pleasure.
Anyone else?
I see in the chat from
Mhm.
Jean that the power does not seem to be shared in this situation and that the initiation should come from YAB leadership. I completely agree, and I think that that would also be giving power to youth to set the agendas and the priorities for the YAB.
Yeah, I agree 100%, right? This could have been a very different type of conversation if it would have started with, hey, what are you guys interested in talking about next agenda item or next meeting, right? And then talking about like what also, I love those ideas. How do we put these prioritizations into those agenda items? What are some ones that can wait into the following week or into the next meeting, right? And what are some that we really want to prioritize? These are the ones that the funders are saying. So I love that.
Yes. I also see from Laura, she said, what would it look for the adults agenda items to be put on the next meeting instead?
Agree. Agree. Like what made their agenda items more of a priority than the young person? Thank you, Laura, for
Right.
naming that. And I think again, I think it's what Brittany was bringing up, right? It's about context and approach, right? It's not about, oh yeah, I already set it up. I just need your opinion and approval, right? It's again, it's that world of how are you involving young people, right? That tokenization piece is like, oh yeah, young people are just they are part of our system and they're informing it, but they don't really lead it, right? And that's what we're seeing in this particular dynamic. I see a great input from Levy, and I hope I didn't mispronounce that. Do you mind coming off mute? I don't know if you're able to, but I think that was great.
Yeah, like I'm not sure if if the scenario is they don't have enough time to discuss in the leadership meeting what needs to go on the agenda for the general meeting, or it's that there's not enough time in the general meeting to add another item to the agenda. Um, and then how often do they meet? Because if they meet regularly, then it may not be a big issue to push an item to the next meeting. But if they only meet quarterly or something, it may be a bigger deal. So those were just some pieces of information I wanted to work into my problem solving.
No, I love that because I think, those are things that as adult partners and supporters in this work, we always want to take into account prior to joining a meeting with young people, right? Like, what are some items that I definitely want to bring forward? What is the time allotted, right? And this is why we left it very open-ended because we wanted to problem solve with you. So there's always time for discussion, right? Like there's always time to just kind of really manage those things. If the meeting is set up to really look at agenda for the next general membership meeting, right? That is the sole focus of that space. So we want to make sure that we are allowing time and preparing for that. So I'm assuming that for this particular scenario, the adult partner just took into consideration what was needed on their behalf, right? Sometimes as service providers, I was one of them, right? You have to check off certain boxes. You have a quota at the end, you have a report to do. And sometimes it could be very human of us to just want to move forward, right? Like we've been on back-to-backs. Like, there's a meeting, this is the first meeting and the next one is in the next quarter. Like, we need to reach these things. And sometimes that is okay. I think, again, it's all about approach. It's all about evolving young people, asking them first, right? Because sometimes I do believe that training calendars is important, right? We talked about development, but it's maybe about, let's have a 30-minute training, right? Focus. And then the next 30 minutes, if it's an hour space, we could talk about those prioritizations that the adult partner had, right? Great point, Levy.
I also see Jean. Oops, sorry.
No,
I
I was
also
just
see Jean bring up a very important point in the chat that says sometimes the funding source dictates priorities, but there needs to be collaborative conversations regarding these priorities and be open to the youth and young adult perspective on priorities. I completely agree. And I really think that best practices here are transparency with your leadership team about what the funding source is dictating and where the YAB members do have power and decision-making ability rather than being tokenistic and vague about where youth have a say.
Yeah, and as a, technical assistance provider for HUD, I do take, I take everybody's perspective and consideration into it. I will also say, right, and we'll get into it a little later during our presentation, how to really set up spaces for young people to make them intentional, right? How to set up those agenda, how to include young people. And one of the tips that I will give this particular scenario and adult partner is making sure that there's some kind of consistency, right? Young people should join the group or join the meeting or the space, kind of knowing what's happening, right? That if you did have this agenda already prescribed, why didn't you send it to the youth leaders prior to the meeting so then they could kind of be prepared as to that, right? Because now we're taking space kind of de-escalating a situation rather than like really ensuring that the whole context is sane, right? And then kind of also, again, I keep bringing it up and I probably will for the rest of this presentation, but approach, right? I feel like this particular adult partner was more like, this is the agenda, just approve it or not, like, rather than approaching into a conversation and saying, I think that this should be also considered. Any final thoughts from anybody else?
In our last couple minutes of this breakout, I also want to prompt you with one last question, which is, what is one way that this leadership team could make space for youth-initiated priorities before the meeting begins?
Ooh, love that. And I gave a tip of that when I was saying earlier, so.
I see Brittany suggested a shared agenda. I love that idea. Our YAB has just started doing that, sharing the document and having members add throughout the month, and that has been super helpful.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Also, something that I've seen other communities do that are also implementing Yasi is if you're meeting on Wednesday, they're saying, please share any agenda items that you would like to talk about, right? And it doesn't have to be something very structural or very high level, right? It could be like, I want to share the highlight of my week. I want to do the icebreaker. I want to do X, Y, and Z, right? Like making it very not so strength-based, which is sometimes our approach and like very direct, but also allowing young people to bring themselves into the space. Okay. Why don't we go back? Did my screen change? No.
We do have a question. Someone has their hand up. Iman?
Well, not a question. I was just gonna make a comment. I think another idea is just, I think as adults we have more executive functions. So just kind of think about like time management, just sending those
Yes.
reminders like, hey y'all, in 2 weeks is our meeting, next Wednesday, in 2
Yep.
days. So that that could be part of the adult role.
I love that. I mean, show of hand, how many of us have forgotten a deadline, a to-do? It could have been on the back of your head. I was late to a meeting today I literally put an alarm to, and I was like, what is that for? So a show of hand, how many of us have either forgotten, missed, right? Or, clocked out at some point of things? It happens. We're all humans, right? And also too, our youth leaders, they are living life, right? We are working in the field. Usually it's like a 9 to 5, a 6, a 10 to 6, right? We have like a set, we're sitting in front of our computer. We know our young people are doing work. They're parents sometimes, right? They have other extracurricular activities. They're in school. So they're juggling a lot, right? And again, it goes back to the skills. Teach them, how do you create reminders on your calendar? How do you create check calendar invites? How do you keep yourself organized? Yeah, great point. Thank you for sharing that. Any last or final inputs?
I wanted to highlight something else in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of common theme of gathering input from the before the meeting. I see polls or surveys, an exchange prior to meeting on a platform that resonates, like texting. We have found that to be astronomically helpful in getting quick responses, and setting norms before the meeting via email.
Yeah. I will also add, that's a great point, whoever said about like polls. Sometimes young people need options, right? I need options. Like, give me some options and I'll select. My brain is just not going to bring an answer on its own. And that's okay. Like, if you have certain options that you're like, does anybody want to lead this piece of the agenda? Does anybody want to add this pieces of the agenda? Which ones are your, most prioritized? Which one are you interested in hearing? That can also be a way to approach the conversation. Any other thoughts? Okay. Okay, so why don't we continue our conversation? If things come up for you as you're hearing, we're going to push from power dynamics to talking about really doing the work. So we're going to talk about prior to outreach and recruitment, right? What are some things as adult partners, organizational providers, organizational leaders, we really need to take into account and get ready for when it comes to our policies, our steps, our forms, right? So we're going to touch on a couple of things that you should consider and take into account before you invite young people into your space. Why is this important? So this is extremely important because you want to make sure that you are having a structure for young people to follow, right? Young people are representatives of the system in a very different way that we are, right? They're walking the system while we are trying to build them, provide direct services or resources. So we want to make sure that we are opening the doors for them to know what they're getting themselves into, right? How do you intend to involve young people into the space? A lot of community or areas of our policies or do an assessment on certain areas of our service provision, which is great, right? But even that needs to be structured, right? How are we collecting that information? Are we compensating people? How are we building a way that is inclusive for young people to really share those inputs? So with these steps that I will be highlighting in the next couple of slides, it will have us thinking about what are some things that we need to prepare for prior to getting young people involved and at what level. Uh-huh. Thank you for that. I keep thinking, please shout me out if you can't see my slides because I am switching and it's just not switching on its own. Okay. Let's see. That switched. Awesome. Okay. So policies to consider. So first things first, we want to make sure that we're highlighting internally before we bring young people in, what is the purpose and our governance within our policies, right? Without a governance and decision-making policy, young people may join with an unclear expectation, right? A lot of young people will see if we're offering compensation as the main highlight. And then once they join, they're like, I don't even know why I'm here. Like, why do you need me? Right. So, and then sometimes we're like, we got a grant. We don't really know what else, I need you to inform X piece, but we need to be a little bit more intentional about that. So in order to maintain that sustainability with young people, to build very authentic relationships, avoid burnout and frustration from our young people, we want to have those clear structures set before we invite them in. Part of that structure is creating role descriptions and participation policies. Mind you how I didn't call it a job description, right? Because this is not a job. Even if they're being compensated, they're not being compensated to the full amount of rate pay that a lot of other people like ourselves as employees are getting paid. So we also need to consider that into our conversation, right? Capacity, availability. Are we being very reasonable with the time that we allowed in young people and the pay that they're getting, right? So we want to make sure that we are outlining what roles we want to see young people play within our systems, with our information, and within our organization. By doing this, right, creating expectations and outlining expectations for young people, you are able to hold accountability, right? And young people are able to hold you accountable as well. And then also making sure that we have and evaluate our safety and safeguarding policies in partnerships with young people. I've worked with many communities who either have very loose safety policies or don't think about it, right? Because it's a youth action board, they're not really receiving services from us. And you will think like they are not prepared to handle conflict, right? A lot of the young people that are coming through your door and being part of the youth action board have a history of homelessness, right? Which as they're informing the system can determine re-traumatization or are experiencing homelessness in the moment, right? So as they're building the system, that brings frustration because the system is not really supporting their need at that time. So taking into account what are some things that we need to set as adult partner, adult allies into our roles, into our policies to really protect the young people, right? Do we have a resource guide that if any of the Youth Action Board members needs or is facing something, they're able to tap into, right? How are we handling conflict resolution in an authentic way to protect our young people, but also making sure that our staff is prepared and equipped to do that? And then finally, policies around compensation and supporting young people. And you're going to hear us talk about this a lot, right? Because funding is one thing, but we want to compensate. And if you're like me, you're like, Sly, where are we getting this money from? We'll get into that. But the first thing that you want to start thinking about is, okay, when and how payments will be provided, right? Like, and this is a lot of talk with your finance, right? Like, what is the current payment system that they're using? Is it flexible? Can it meet young people, right? Can we work outside of a gift card? Is it gift card only? Do we have flexibility on the type of gift card, right? Do we have flexibility on the amount on the gift cards, right? Or is it a fixed amount? Having this open conversation, crossing things out, looking for other solutions, right? What documentation is needed from young people? If you're working with young people that are experiencing homelessness, a lot of them lack documentation, right? They may not have an ID. They may not have a birth certificate. They may not have all these documentations that we may need. And then finally, how should young people track their time and submit their time? This is all the systems that we want to build and then deliver for young people. Young people should not be building these things, but asking questions like, oh, what does it mean to submit my time? And then we have an answer for it. So how do we get to that? You're like, Sly, you gave me great pointers, but what does that mean, right? So I am a visual person. I'm all about like, let's think about steps A through Z and develop them thoroughly. I like an A1, A2 type of person. So when we're thinking about purpose, when we're thinking about steps to creating clear policies, this is what I consider. And this is a lot of the steps that I take with my, sorry, I just realized that my stuff didn't share.
I was doing some research and it seems like it's a Canva issue.
Ah, okay. Thank you so
it's
much,
not just you, Sly, that people are having that issue with Canva slides.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I'll try to use my keyboard, if anything, instead of the little arrows on Canva. But you guys should be able to see the steps to clear policies. Great. So here are some clear steps as to how can you start developing these policies. Now, many of us may be coming from different roles and like, hey, Sly, I don't really have a lot of power to really develop policies within my organization. I don't have a lot of power to, to make decisions within my organization. And I encourage you, and I'm calling us a call of action, right? You may feel like you don't have power. And I'm telling you that you do as a human, as a person in this field, right? Whether that level of power is not as the higher level of power, you could start the conversation, right? You can continue to push through it. And eventually older adults or allies who are in the room, right, and are able to make these changes and policies or power changes, they will be able to listen to you. But what I encourage is do not stop to support these different grounds of communication, right, and conversation. If you're thinking of developing policies, here are some steps that you may want to consider. So when we're talking about purpose and governance policies, you want to make sure that you're gathering a small group of organizational leaders, right? And this is a mixture of different levels of roles and responsibilities within your organization. You could start very small, you could start very big. You also kind of want to look at young people that are either receiving services from your organization or alumni, not necessarily for them to join the YAB, but just to inform what you're talking about. Again, you're already starting to create space for those young people. And then this team acts as champions for the future Youth Action Board. Some of the questions that you may want to consider as you're developing your purpose and governance policy is, why are we creating a Youth Action Board? First question, like, what is the purpose? Is it just because of a grant? What is the grant asking us for? We can definitely lean on a grant for funding, but you can also push other expectations within that grant and have young people support other areas. What is the core mission, purpose, and scope of the Youth Action Board, right? Is the program design? Is the policy input? Is a system change? What is it that it means to have them in the room? How will the YAB members be selected? How does the YAB fit into the larger organization? And which department houses them? Very important, right? Sometimes we are at capacity. We cannot hire a new person, Slide, to support the YAB, right? So it's all about us really looking at what does that mean. One of the things that we didn't get to do is that Paige created a great scenario on like time management and like evaluating. A lot of young people work during the day that we work and then are able to meet after hours, right? So what does flexibility look like within your organization to really meet young people where they're at? When you're thinking about role description and participation policies, you want to make sure that you include a role description for Youth Action Board members that includes time commitment, expectations, are there any benefits on compensation or other kinds of support, and then the meeting format, right? All of this is right on the top. That will also allow the young person, you already give them the power to choose whether or not they're capable to meet at the time that they need to meet, right? That they have the time commitment, that they know the expectations and are able to meet them right away. You want to define those responsibility and structure so then the Youth Action Board is integrated into the work and they know what their expectations are. Some of the questions that you want to be asking yourself or your organization within this step is, what does membership mean within the Youth Action Board, right? What does it mean to be a member? What does it mean to either be terminated as a member, graduate from the YAB, right? What does that mean? What are the expectations for time commitment, participation, attendance, responsibilities, and bigger yet, decision-making, right? How much decision-making power are we giving those YAB and youth that are joining the YAB? Finally, you want to ask, what will the application and onboarding process look like? And Paige is going to walk us through a little bit into like onboarding and kind of like outreach, but you also want to start thinking about like, do we want an application process? How is it accessible? Is it inviting, right? Having 20 questions on an application process is not accessible at all, right? Again, this is not a full-time job. So you want to make it very flexible for young people to be able to fill out those applications while they're doing transportation in and out of work and back home. And then when thinking about safety and safeguarding for youth and young adults in partnerships policies, you want to really think about policies that protect older young people, but also minors, right? A lot of our YABs, they serve 16 to 24 as HUD kind of develops those ages, right? And mandates that we keep an open forum of outreach. But you also want to establish a code of conduct. What does it mean to take accountability within those young people? What does it mean with conflict arise? How do we set boundaries? How do we set expectations for safety, especially from one member to another? Those are things that I see a lot within my connection with organizations, right? Some of the things that you would like to consider asking during this step is how will adults and youth interact to ensure that youth and young adults are equally in collaboration with adults, right? So then the adult partner is not in domination of that. What code of conduct and conflict resolution strategies and accountability structures do you currently have in place that can be followed through by the Youth Action Board? And what are some things that we need to also take into account is how can issues or conflicts be resolved between adult partners and young people? One of the tips that I can give about that is having an adult partner and youth contract created by young people. I have all my YAPs kind of create that together. I lost you. Is it showing? No. I don't know why my computer, okay. So yeah, so thinking about those steps. And then finally, is my screen showing? Okay. And then finally, thinking about compensation and support policies, just again, having those clear understandings of your budgets and the limits. Sometimes the budget is very flexible. Sometimes we cannot move from a budget, and that's okay. What I encourage you to do and what we talk about is different ways to obtain funding and sustainability of YABs in a couple of slides from now. But some of the things that we want to consider is, do we have the budget and staff capacity to assign and sustain the YAB, right? How much and how often and in what form will compensation be provided? What other financial support can we provide in? Is there any private funding, any other local sectors that we can touch on, right? My Southern Nevada YAB, they went into their local pizza shop and then they get free lunch during their, free dinner during their meetings because they partner with them, right? So things like that, it's all about teaching young people advocacy and how to continue that work on their own as well. Okay, I'll pass it to Paige. Are you able to see my screen still? No. I've never dealt with this, but again, I am not a Teams person, so let's see. Okay,
We see it. You're resilient. Outreach, recruitment, and onboarding are really the core components of getting a YAB started, but they're also the core components of keeping a YAB sustainable and effective. So we wanted to go over some general practices for outreaching and engaging youth authentically. I cannot see. Oh, yes, perfect. We want to make sure that we're using targeted outreach and marketing strategies, which may sound a little bit daunting, but really what it's all about is thinking about directing that messaging at the people that you want to direct it at before you just start putting flyers all over your city. So thinking about going narrow and deep as opposed to far and wide. When you're thinking about recruitment, you want to be thinking about, where do youth go when they need help? Where do they already hang out and feel safe? Who do they trust? And who's hard to reach? And then looking at social media and where are some places that you can reach the youth that you're trying to reach. And when you're thinking about messaging and language, whether it's online or offline, thinking about engaging colors, creating easy access for a next step, so using a QR code or a link, and providing information at glance that's easy to understand. And then also making whatever the QR code leads to, or whatever the digital resource is, phone friendly, because most youth and young adults are engaging with these resources with a mobile device. And then Planning for post outreach is very important because outreach without a follow-up or a next step is extraction. So we want to signal that youth input is valued to avoid tokenism and also to take away maybe some of the nerves that somebody might be having about being on a board, which can be daunting for a lot of people, or not really knowing what that would look like concretely can also mystify the process a little bit. So during onboarding, making sure that youth are understanding why they're at the table, what they're there to accomplish, and what tools they're going to be equipped with to accomplish that. So having an onboarding presentation that shows the scope of the organization, for example, in our YAB, talking about what is the continuum of care and what is this grant that we're working off of, sort of giving your members that context. And in the chat here is a toolkit that would be very helpful to creating these onboarding tools. A lot of that context, especially in housing, can be really daunting, but having a unified onboarding document that every member receives is a great way to ensure that everybody's on the same page. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk more personally about my experience on the Balance of State Continuum of Care Youth Advisory Board. We have an awesome, engaged board. I'm so excited to be a part of it. Our board represents the entire state with the exception of Marion County, and we have 6 members who are representing regions 2A, 3, 4, 8, and 10. And we're always looking to ensure that geographical diversity so that our representation is truly can speak to issues across the state, because they vary greatly by area and especially by density of an area. We can support up to 8 members, so we're actively recruiting to fill those spots. We meet monthly for 90 minutes, and our leadership team, which is myself and 2 co-chairs, meet with Jean and Laura from IHCDA monthly prior to our member meeting to set that agenda and delegate responsibilities. I also wanted to give some examples about our pay structure just to help everybody understand how that may work. So we are paid on a monthly schedule. We keep a timesheet in like a Google Sheets document. We're paid monthly by Transform Consulting Group as 1099 employees, and each position has a different hourly rate. So the chair has an hourly rate, co-chairs have an hourly rate, and members have an hourly rate. And then we also have a flat rate per day for any conferences or day-long events that our members might be attending. So keeping that really standard across time and members as our membership will change. We are working on some really exciting projects. We're working on a statewide symposium for the fall of 2026. That is a part of the YESI grant, and we are going to be able to share the results from the needs assessment during that symposium, which is the first needs assessment of that kind, of that scope, that has happened in the Balance of State. So we're very excited about that, and our Youth Advisory Board has been able to help pick breakout sessions and give a lot of input about the logistics, creating a space that's welcoming to youth and young adults to hopefully encourage some collaboration during that symposium. We've also had the opportunity to present on the IHCDA Spring Development Day. We've hosted breakout sessions the last 2 years as a panel, which has been a really great opportunity for our members, but also a great opportunity for the community at large to get YABs on their radar, and specifically to get our YAB of rock stars on their radar. And we also just completed an internal project that was mostly in our leadership team. We restructured our YAB to create individualized roles for each member. And that was in an effort to make sure that the YAB was serving members as much as the members are serving the YAB. So tailoring their role to their personal and professional interests, which I'll show you on the next slide. But I also wanted to add that in our outreach and recruitment, it has been a little bit of a struggle, but we want to share what we have learned with you, which is that libraries, community centers, and McKinney-Vento liaisons have been great launch pads to start outreach and recruitment, and we are hoping to do a whole lot more at the symposium. So on the next slide, I want to share our wonderful board with you and their individual roles. Drum roll, please. Perfect. All right, there we are. There I am. I'm the board chair. Danny and Destiny are co-chairs to help share the load of some of the leadership tasks. Danny is also our marketing and communications lead, as that is a career interest for her. Destiny is our community partnerships lead. Niche is our data lead. Brooke is our lived experience lead, so taking a lot of that storytelling piece. And Rachel is our public policy lead. So we are at the very beginning of implementing these roles, but we are so excited to have more defined roles for our members, and I would be more than happy to share what we have learned through our YAB experience with any of you.
I just want to take a moment. If we all could give the best emoji that you could come up with to shout out these young people that are changing the balance of state of Indiana. They truly deserve it. And they don't get enough recognition as they should. So just want to clap it out. I see a couple of hands. Are those like our YAB? I don't know. But yes, thank you.
I do know
Thank you.
Rachel is definitely in the room.
Love it. Love it. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you for the love. Okay. Oh, this is me. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Paige. Is that a hand up that I see? Oh, is that recognition? Yes.
Is there a
shout out.
question?
I think they were showing love,
Okay.
I'm gonna say. But if you do have a question, please come off mute, ask it at any time. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, we gave you some tools, we gave you some steps. Paige was able to put it into true action, right? And kind of like, what does it really look like? Now we're going to talk about like, how do we strengthen those partnerships? How do we maintain sustainability? How do we make authentic engagement with young people so that it could last, right? A lot of the communities that I work with, not just within YESI or YHGP, but even outside of that, they struggle to keep youth engagement. And I was like, okay, let's talk about how can we develop systems that work for young people. But you cannot develop that and allow young people to feel connected if they're not involved, right?
Sly, I think there is a question. Tiavana has a hand up. I don't know if Tiavana.
Yeah. I don't know if that was like, I think that's what Paige and I were addressing, but as I switch off my share.
It was an accident, I'm sorry.
No worries, but if you come
Okay.
up with anything, let us know. So here are some helpful tips on how can you go about leading youth action board spaces. So I think this is really connected to our This is really connecting to our scenario earlier, right? And it's all about really how can we make agendas? How can we make spaces authentic for young people? How can we make them feel safe? How can we continue to make them feel welcome and join those spaces, right? Again, compensation is a big plus, but it goes a little bit further than that, right? So starting off with share power and intentionality. We talked about that setting agenda and what does that look like, giving young people options, right? So allow young people to set agenda, facilitate discussions, and lead decision making. There's a lot of times that I ask my adult partners, like, why are young people not leading spaces on their own during their YAB meetings, right? Like that is their space. They should use us as a guiding our skills on how to facilitate spaces, but they should be doing that on their own, right? Adults act as supporters or coaches and not directors, right? We're not directing those meetings. We're not setting things up. We're leading them to do those things. And then one of the tips that I wanted to highlight is sometimes you want to have set items on your agenda that are standing and ongoing, right? Like a lot of my YAPs have their norms. A lot of my YAPs have their icebreakers. They have core meeting updates. They have YAP updates, right? And then each person or each leadership team has a responsibility to those, right? Maybe the president or the chair or the board or the co-chair are leading the updates, right? And they already know how to prepare. They're joining those meetings, they're taking notes, they're coming back to those other meetings to share those updates. So that's their role. And if you make something consistent, they know what to prepare for, right? And again, also providing space for flexibility for new items, right? Because we're in a world that is forever changing. Create a safe and brave, inclusive space. How do we do that? So it's all about really starting the conversation, especially if you're thinking, I don't have a youth action board. My organization is really not involving youth, right? The first question that you should be asking is, what does norms feel to you? How do you feel about confidentiality and privacy? What does respect mean to you? What are some things that you want to see within these meeting spaces? So then we're all showing up with that authentic self, right? And that we know that we're going to feel respected, that if we share something that is happening to us, it's not going to leave this room or this meeting, right? Use icebreakers and check-ins to build trust, right? I'm really big on saying, hey, Jean, do you mind leading next week's icebreaker, right? Especially with young people who don't feel comfortable. They don't feel confident enough to lead a full agenda item. You could start them small, right? Encourage them that you trust them to lead those things, right? If you trust them, they'll trust themselves. Actively including quieter voices and respect the different communication styles, right? Everybody communicates very different and everybody shows up to meetings very different. I don't expect young people or anybody that joins a meeting with me to join with cameras on. You join if you want to with the camera, right? Sometimes we have like camera Fridays, right? Where it's like, show me your best hair, show me your best hat, show me your funky hat, show me something, right? Making it very inclusive. But I also encourage young people that if you feel comfortable using the chat, use the chat. You don't have to come off mute. If you feel like, hey, my voice is better, I really don't feel like my accessibility is typing it, that's totally fine. Be mindful that a lot of the young people that are joining these spaces, they're either transporting back from work and going home. They may not be able to come off mute or be on camera at the time. Compensate and respect youth expertise. So pay young people for their time, period. Like, I understand funding. There's different ways, right, that you can compensate young people for their time. And we'll talk about a little bit about that in the next slide. But start meetings on time and end on time. Respect young people's time. And that if it does go over, plan for that, right? Hey, it looks like we're going 10 minutes over. If anybody's able to stay, that's great, but you don't have to, right? I want to respect your time. Treat lift expertise as experts, right? And not just as an input, right? Again, they bring perspective that we cannot even understand or compare to any other skill, right? Build skills without taking over. So again, offer optional skill building. Hey, Slide, do you want to facilitate next week's meeting? Are there any items that you feel comfortable enough delivering, right? And kind of opening those doors, allowing them to lead. And one of the things that I will add, that before you start allowing young people or like pushing young people to do these facilitation, public speakings or leadership, that you're training them on those skills as well, right? That you're providing spaces that they feel equipped to do so. I myself, right, I give training literally daily. Jean knows this. And I still get nervous, right? I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to do a good job, right? It's just human nature. So we also need to respect and take accountability for that. Allow for young people to give you feedback privately as well as you giving them feedback privately, right? Things will come up, especially when we have young people who are experiencing the homeless system, that they may join the meeting and be frustrated, right? And just blur out everything that their day went super horrible, and that's okay, right? How are we handling that? We talked about policies, right? These are some of the things that we also want to prep for as staff and adult allies, but also that if we have changing of behavior that we want to implement with a young person, right? A learning skill, that we're doing that in private, that we're not calling people out in the moment in front of their peers, right? We're respecting that they probably had a bad day. We probably failed them by not providing the proper skills to address public speaking or interaction in certain meeting spaces. And finally, feedback loops, right? So clearly show how youth recommendations were used, right? Again, just not taking that expertise just as a face level or a face value, but really taking it a step further. Like, oh, I love that input. This is how I see this playing out, right? That the expectation is very clear. One of the things that I've seen from other communities of young people is that their expectation is, I'm joining this meeting, the system is going to change. There's going to be 1,000 vouchers for housing, and it's happening tomorrow, right? Because we didn't set clear expectations. So if we are collecting information and input from young people, they should know how that information is going to translate, right? Who are the powers at hand, right? Our funder is one of our powers at hand. They really determine how we really navigate the systems and our level of work, and young people should be able to understand that. So I know that Paige really mentioned about those trainings for onboarding, right? And kind of leveling up young people into your organization, also leveling up young people into your homeless systems, right? Who is HUD? How does their funding work? How can I learn more, right? And then finally, celebrate the wins and acknowledge contributions and publicly, right? We reprimand privately, but we really want to highlight everything that they're doing right very, very openly. I'm really big on youth-driven work. I love working with young people and youth action boards, and I'm forever grateful of the input that they bring in, and how they continuously like striving to change the systems that, have support them and hurt them in many different ways. Okay. Did it change? No. I'm like, I see it on the screen now, and I'm like, oh, it did not change. Our recording is going to be funny. Okay. So, I don't know why I did that. Okay. So finally, highlighting a little bit about YAP compensation and sustainability, right? This is a big thing that comes up throughout a lot of my communities. It's like, how do we continuously fund our YAP after the funding is done? Or how do we get more funding, right? So what does sustainability look like? So young people operating independently on their own values, right? If we're teaching and developing skills within young people, including, which is something that I do literally 3 months in after developing our youth action board bylaws, is how do we do advocacy and strategizing for funding, right? There's so many funding sources out there, whether private, nonprofit, public, whatever you want to call it, right? I think that the hardest one is federal funding because it attaches a lot of requirements, but there's a lot of funding that young people can apply for themselves on behalf of the YAB, right? And support that. The only way that we're going to be able to support them is if we teach them those skills on how to do that. So a sustainable youth action board works to end youth homelessness alongside the community stakeholders. And that's something that we need to really, really integrate into our youth action board so young people can really, join that collection of funding. Recognition of expertise and non-monetary benefits. I talked about like some of my Southern Nevada YABs, some of my other YABs, they look for other ways to support their young people with food, clothing, right? Like different things that can support them along the way. But here are some other ways that you could show recognition to your YAB. Creating certificates, letter of recommendations if a young person is going for a new job, right? Hey, do you need a letter of recommendations? I tell all of my young people, whatever you're doing in your youth action board is something you could add to your resume. You're learning facilitation skills, you're learning public speaking, you're integrating yourself into systems, you're knowing system change, you're working with adult partners, and you're taking roles of leadership. So all of this can be developed at a greater scope, right? And a lot of young people are like, oh, I'm just here, and I'm like, no. this is your resume right here. Like, let's start it, right? Like, a lot of us within this field started as a youth action board member and are now teaching the pathways into bigger things. So I always encourage those things. Include policies, again, for professional recognition. So listing youth action board members as contributors in reports, presentations, and publications. Don't gatekeep, right? Share the power. If a young person helped you create something, give them the recognition that they deserve, right? I know you many times are the face, but it doesn't mean that you have to be the sole recognition individual in the space, right? So how can youth lead sustainability? It's all about really creating a system where young people, again, feel comfortable for advocacy and leading spaces for funding. A lot of YABs that I've worked with, we have work trainings. I taught them how to set up fashion shows. A lot of my Youth Action Board members are creators, artists, and they create amazing things. And I'm like, let's put it on a show and let's sell it, right? Let's put your name out there. And all of that, you could either transform it for yourself or transform it for the YAB, right? So it's all about really evaluating what are the skills that the members of your Youth Action Board or your youth integration really possess that they want to show to the world, and that we're able to really elevate those skills and also elevate funding, right? If we're putting a fashion show, we're charging at the door, right? Like, we're doing things. I had Youth Action Board members cook and do a cookout, right? And then sell the food because they love cooking. And I was like, great, bring the mac and cheese, right? It's all about really evaluating and not closing the door, not being, opening all perspective for young people to really lead the fundraising strategies. I will also say, highlighting just a cute, like a tip, there are websites, and I'll add them in the chat after this is done, that young people are able to access in order to touch on different fundings. It does require them to either write a storytelling, like Paige was telling, or writing a report or some kind of like essay, but also they give like $500, $5,000 to whatever costs. And I'll share those after this conversation. Okay, so in summary, youth voice and representation, whether as a youth action board or as an informant or whatever you want to call it, whatever your current funding is allowing you to call it, is crucial, right? To driving your work and adding into, and highlighting and adding into system barriers. I can't move. And addressing those system barriers, sorry. So I like to finish all of my presentations with a call of action, right? A lot of you kind of share in the beginning of the presentation where you're at within your youth engagement, and you cannot see the slide. Okay. So what I would like to say, this is an important slide for me, is I would like to call you into a call of action, right? That if you haven't started yet, get together internally and explore how you can begin, right? It doesn't have to be a very direct or structured meeting. Start the conversation, even while you're eating lunch. Be like, what would that look like? What that girl slide was saying in that training, right? What would it look like to bring young people in? What are some barriers? Like, who's gonna say no from our upper management? Who's gonna say no from our leaders, right? And how do we address that? What is the dynamic? Do we need to buy them coffee? What does that look like, right? And then if you are starting and you have started those steps, I will say, or you're thinking about start your recruitment and outreach with youth where they are known to congregate, right? Paige was able to add some areas here. We were able to kind of talk about like what are some things that young people use. Obviously, social media is a highlight for us because that's how young people connect. A lot of young people may have a phone but may not have a service and lean on Wi-Fi, right? So that's very limited. But also really looking into your county fairs, like social environmental events that are happening. Like, how can we engage? Us at Point Source Youth, we do a yearly national conference, a symposium to ending youth homelessness. I encourage you to come in. That's another way where you can meet a lot of young people, a lot of other communities who are doing the work as well. Faith-based organizations, coffee shops, right? Skate parks. And again, any music venues, right? Anywhere where you are able to really congregate with young people is where I tell you. And what I will leave you with is that as you're leaving this process, and leaving this training, I really hope that you remember uh, pieces of it, but mostly that you are becoming more trusting and more open into inviting young people into the space and exploring what that benefit can look like for you. Okay, it didn't change. Wow, my tech. Okay, any questions?
Sly, I
Any-
see a question in the chat
Mhm.
from Megan. Megan Bannett asked if there's any suggestions on how we can make onboarding engaging, informative, brief, and accessible.
Yes. So that is a great question. And I'm also gonna actually I would love for Paige to start if you have anything to share about your process of onboarding on the balance estate, and then I could share what I've done with other communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can share kind of what we're working on right now as a YAB, which is creating a slide deck, an onboarding slide deck. So some sort of unifying resource, whether that's a document or a recorded presentation or a slide deck, that has all of the information, the context that you think somebody would need. And then our plan as a YAB is to review that on a yearly basis. So even our standing members would get a refresher on the context, but I really think that having a standard single source of that onboarding information would be pretty important.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree. I think having a process already in place that you could just continue to like elevate within your youth action board is very, very crucial because it also gives accessibility for your ability, right? Like you don't have to recreate the wheel, it's already there. One of the things that I like to do with my communities is we create a timeline, right, for young people. We talk about what does it look like from their interest form or application process all the way to the first 3 months of them being a member, right? What are some trainings that are crucial for them to take in the first 30 days? What are some things that we want them to achieve within the next 90 days and so on? This also allows for young people to really have a transparent view as to what their expectations are in their onboarding process. Part of the bylaws as well that we co-create with the with youth action boards is a checklist, right? So each new member gets a checklist and they meet with the chair, some youth action board call it president, right? So they meet with the head of the youth action board to go over those that checklist on a monthly basis and make sure that they're reaching those marks, right? Also, this is an opportunity for them to express to a peer how they're feeling about their integration into the YAB, right? Maybe it's overwhelming for them. Maybe they thought they could handle it, but all of a sudden they lost interest or something came about within their personal life that is preventing them from continuing, or we need to assess our accessibility with particular members. So things to consider. Yeah, any other questions?
I have a question,
Yeah.
Tiavana. So something that I've been kind of brainstorming over with is how to, because this is community building. How do I get the teamwork aspect of it? Because one thing I really do notice is a very real barrier for my generation is being able to come together and person to person, um, communicate, get to know each other, build a strong foundation together. How would we go about opening up those doorways for us to connect with each other a little bit, at least in a way that strengthens what it is that we're like, the mission, the purpose, etc.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll take a stab and then I would love to hear Paige's input. But I think it's, I was a service provider myself, and I think I mentioned it in a couple of slides ago, but I encourage to not start with work, right? Start with community building, engaging. What is your favorite color, right? It's not just an icebreaker. Make a whole meeting out of like fun activities and get to know each other, right? Many of us are only able to meet virtually rather than in person. I will love an in-person meeting at all times because it just makes that bonding a little bit more. We're able to break bread, like we're able to like really sense each other's energies in the room. So using platforms, I'm a big Mentimeter platform. I don't know if you ever used it. It's like my favorite thing. Young people love it. It's anonymous, but you could play games in there. You could ask for feedback in there, and it's very accessible via phone, right? So that comes to say, that is to say that using and approaching different ways of like interaction and communication, right? A lot of us, right, we're like, all right, let's open the agenda. It's a Word document and we're taking notes and very straightforward. That may work for us as an organizational level, but you're going to lose young people if there's nothing that attracts them to that. So maybe creating a slide deck, maybe creating questions that really engage them, right? Also, as providers, I encourage you to pay attention. If a young person is saying, my favorite color is black, be like, oh, I remember that you shared that your favorite color is black. Is there anything else that like you like, right? I will also say learning, one of the things I just gave a trauma-informed training to one of my New York Yabs. And one of the things that I asked them was like, how do you know that you're not having a good day? And how can we know that you're not having a good day, right? Because you may be showing up trying to be your best self, right? And we may not know. So we want to be able to bring support. So a lot of them were able to share like, oh, sometimes I come in and I say hi instead of hello, right? And that is already like a flag that I'm not having a good day. We're like, okay, noted, right? So then when they are coming in and showing those flags, we're able to really attentively and privately say, hey, are you having an okay day? Like I noticed you said hi, and I remember that was one of your flags, right? Paige, anything that I missed?
No, I feel like you touched on everything that I was thinking.
Okay, so I will say I'm gonna, if there are no more questions. If you do have questions after the training, I invite you. Did my screen? No, my screen didn't. I'm gonna laugh at my own pain at this point. But we're gonna transition. I just kind of want to say thank you to everybody that showed up. Before you log off, there is a survey that we really need your feedback and input. We're always trying to make the space more informative, really create learning spaces that really matter to you, and create content that really evaluates where you're at in your system change. We added here our email address. So if you ever want to contact Paige, myself, or Jojo, for any kind of reason, if you're like, hey, Sly, do you have a training on X? I have trainings on everything. Jean knows. So if you need a training, come to me. If you need a process or structure, come to me. If you need youth direct experience, go to Paige. If you need anything dealing with like mental health, substance use, Janady is your girl. And then I also added Jean's information here if you need any kind of internal support or have any internal questions.